Welcome to the Coin Stories podcast, where we talk about investing, hard money, Bitcoin, and how technology is revolutionizing the global economy. I'm Natalie Brunell, and I'm here to learn with you. So this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. None of the discussions should constitute as official investment advice, and you should always do your own research. Make sure you're subscribed to my page so you don't miss out on any new content. This show is made possible through partnerships with companies I trust, and I'm very picky about who I partner with. So I hope you take the time to listen to the ad reads throughout the show. First up, Swan. I partnered with Swan because it is a Bitcoin-only company that is focused on helping people save for their future and self-custody their Bitcoin. Swan can help you start a direct deposit to take advantage of Bitcoin as a savings technology and learn how to take it off the exchange. Swan's mission is to educate 10 million future Bitcoiners through free resources and media projects like the Hard Money Show. Swan also offers retirement planning with an IRA, tax loss harvesting, and a white glove private client service. I use Swan to dollar cost average, and I deposit a little bit every day that's equivalent to what I might spend on a meal so that I add to my future nest egg and lower my yearly cost basis. Swan Studios produces my hard money news reports, simplifying Bitcoin for mass audiences and documenting Bitcoin adoption around the world. To learn more and get $10 in free Bitcoin, head to swanbitcoin.com/Natalie Brunell. All right, next up, Bitcoin Conference 2024. The world's largest Bitcoin event is headed to Nashville next year. Early bird tickets are now available, and this is the lowest cost you'll be able to secure for the conference all year. And if you use the code HODL, HODL, you'll get an extra 10% off. So come join us for 3 great days of networking events, panels, keynotes, workshops, and more. You never know what big name might be announced when tickets are much, much higher in price. Head to b.tc/conference and use the code HODL. And before Bitcoin 2024, the next conference I'm headed to is BitBlock Boom this August in Austin, Texas, where I'm really looking forward to speaking alongside Preston Pish, Mark Moss, and other great voices in the space. You can get your tickets at bitblockboom.com and use code HODL for 10% off. I'll see you there. All right, it's time for the show. Hi, everyone. Joining me today is the CEO of Hut 8 Mining, Jaime Leverton, who I had the chance to spend some time with in Miami at the Bitcoin conference. Jaime, how are you doing?
Well, thanks so much for having me on.
First, let's talk a little bit about the headlines that are happening in the space, because there's been so much regulatory pressure on the industry overall. So first of all, what's your reaction? A lot of people think that there's this, bigger plan to crack down and maybe even eliminate crypto, but how do you see it from your vantage point?
It's definitely an active time with respect to what's going on in the US regulatory regime in particular. I think there's a big difference in the views held about Bitcoin versus the other types of tokens. And I think that delineation is important to make. And I think it's also important to understand that while we're seeing a lot of noise in the US markets, we're actually seeing a softening in other markets around the world. So the UK is definitely opening up more with respect to thoughtful regulation for the digital asset space. Hong Kong is now opening up in a really thoughtful way, which is surprising given the historical stance coming out of China with respect to digital assets. And then, of course, the UAE really driving a very open, innovative approach with respect to digital assets in general.
So do you think that this is actually all going to play out in a positive way, especially for Bitcoin? Do you see more potentially institutional adoption after some of the clarity kind of spreads within the general public?
Yeah, I think me personally, I've never been more bullish on Bitcoin. We saw a really exciting headline last week with BlackRock applying for a Bitcoin spot ETF, and a really thoughtful kind of application coming forward from them. So it'll be fascinating to see how that is handled by the SEC. I think just the activity, the excitement, the innovation that we're seeing come back onto the Bitcoin blockchain. Of course, I think everyone's familiar with what's been happening in the ordinal space, but the idea that people are really coming back to Bitcoin as kind of the base blockchain and building new exciting products on Bitcoin, I think is one of the most exciting things happening in our space, again, with respect to Bitcoin in particular.
Talk to me a little bit about what's happened over the last year. running a Bitcoin mining company? Because when that bear market really hit, when a lot of these companies started to kind of unwind overall in the space, the big crypto casinos that went under, that put a lot of downward pressure on the price, which I know is difficult for a mining company. So how did all of that go? Because some of the Bitcoin mining companies we saw also file for bankruptcy.
It goes back to how you kind of approach the bull market in many respects. And I think what we saw for a lot of the companies that blew up, both in mining and other parts of crypto, a lot of it had to do with leverage, taking on just too much debt during that bull market for them to be able to service it in the bear market with compressed margins. I think certainly with many of the exchanges, it was more about just lack of governance, in some cases potentially outright fraud, and these things can really happen in any industry. It wasn't particular to digital assets, or really had nothing to do with the underlying kind of technology that fuels this industry. That was really about people just not doing the right things or living up to their fiduciary obligations in running a business.
No, that's very, very true. I think a lot of painful lessons learned, but hopefully in the end, again, it will all be good for the space in the long run. For people that aren't super familiar with the different Bitcoin mining companies, Hut 8, obviously publicly listed. I know you're expanding most of your operations in Canada, but now some will be in the US, is my understanding. Can you talk to me a little bit about just the company? How does it, separate itself from the different mining companies out there? And what has it been like being the CEO?
So that's a lot of questions in that question, Nat. So I've been the CEO of Hut since December of 2020. I took over just as the industry was coming out of the last bear market. My background was really entirely in the traditional technology space before coming into Hut. I think there are quite a few things that differentiate Hut within the mining space. As you referenced, today we're headquartered in Canada, operated entirely in Canada. We've got 3 mining sites here, and then we have 5 traditional data centers as well in Canada. We were created in late 2017, and we're the second Bitcoin mining company to go public in North America, originally in 2018 on the Toronto Venture Exchange. And then we moved up to the big board, as we call it, the TSX, in summer of 2020. And then we're the first Canadian publicly traded miner to dual list onto the NASDAQ, which we did in June of 2021. There are a few things that really set Hut apart, besides being one of the oldest publicly traded miners in the space. We are also the first publicly traded company to start holding Bitcoin on balance sheet, which we did really from the beginning in 2018. And we continue to have one of the largest unencumbered stacks of Bitcoin on our balance sheet of any public company, which we're really proud of. The other thing I think that makes us stand out, really, in the bull market, in the last bull market, we made a conscious decision to start to diversify the business. And we purchased 5 traditional data centers from another publicly traded Canadian company. And so with that, we got just under 400 enterprise customers. We sell a mix of co-location, cloud, managed services products. So really completely uncorrelated to Bitcoin mining or Bitcoin mining economics. But because my background and many of my leadership team's background is on the traditional tech and data center side, once I spent time in the Bitcoin mining world, which really, you can think of a Bitcoin mine almost as an industrial scale data center. The motions are very much the same. We've got servers, we have power, we run them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's secured by a security team and network operations center. So these are all things that are very transferable from the traditional data center world. And then of course there are a number of differences as far as we don't have the redundancy layer in a Bitcoin mine that you would see in a traditional data center. But over time, I really believe we're going to get more convergence between these two worlds, because at the end of the day, this is all about driving clusters of compute that need to be reliable and need to be run in many cases at the lowest operating cost possible as we start to get into more and more clustered compute, which is really what Bitcoin mining is doing with ASICs, which is a purpose-built hardware for Bitcoin mining. But now we're seeing a proliferation in high performance computing on the GPU side with everything going on in AI and machine learning. And so I think these worlds, are going to more and more start to resemble one another in different ways.
And I'm assuming your experience with data centers and your background in traditional tech, that sort of informed and prepared you for now your role. How did you become CEO?
Yeah, it absolutely did prepare me for the role. I started my career, I spent 10 years at IBM, and then I left IBM at the end of 2009 and really spent the second half of my career in a variety of different companies and roles, but much more focused on driving either a transformation program or a high growth program. And really, it was that experience kind of going into different companies and solving for different challenges that ultimately led to the role at Hut 8. The Hut 8 board had hired an executive recruiter that was familiar with me and some of the work that I had done in other challenging mandates, and thought that I might be the right candidate. I had luckily already orange pilled myself back in 2017, so I was very comfortable and familiar with Bitcoin. I had that technology infrastructure background, and again had a history of going into challenging mandates and being successful in how we addressed and ultimately grew those businesses out or transacted them or whatever was the desired goal at that time.
Well, it's really inspiring to see. I obviously believe there should be more women at the forefront of these industries, not just Bitcoin, but in general, technology and engineering, computer science. So congratulations on that. Tell me a little bit more just about the difference maybe between Bitcoin mining and the operation of a Bitcoin mining company versus data centers. What are the differences that maybe would be understandable to someone without a lot of knowledge in the space?
Biggest difference really comes down to uptime. So in a traditional data center world, those the programs, the databases, the software layer, everything running in those data centers, it could be critical information systems, it could be hospital systems, it could be any number of cloud deployments, all of those types of workloads that need to be running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They can't have any downtime whatsoever. And that requirement to have 100% availability for a data center is what drives a significant amount of cost into how those data centers are built. They have to have 99.9999% uptime, and therefore there's a ton of cost that goes into that, because you can't just rely on the power feed that's coming from the grid. For the highest uptime, you really want two diverse power feeds. You want then a number of generators that in the event of the loss of grid power, then the generators kick in. You need a number of generators that can support the full load for 12, 24, 36 hours. And all of that drives incremental costs. There's a level of security required that drives significant costs into the space. Whereas if you compare that to a Bitcoin mine, the uptime is actually completely different. A Bitcoin mine is the only industrial scale load, as in we use a very, very large amount of power in a Bitcoin mine, but it is designed to be able to power on and off depending on the needs of the grid, the pricing of the grid, the pricing of the power coming off the grid, and therefore you design it completely differently. it's expected that site goes up and down on a moment's notice. And that's one of the beauties of it, because often Bitcoin miners are working, they're set up on a grid and they're working in conjunction with the grid to allow for that power to be monetized 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but either by the Bitcoin mine or by the constituents that need it. So our mine in Medicine Hat is a great example. We work directly with the power authority as well as the city itself, and we adjust our loads based on the requirements of the city on the other side, so that power is always being put directly where it's most needed and always being monetized. So that has created, for Hut in Medicine Hat, we're one of the most significant sources of revenue for both the city and the power authority, without taking anything away from the needs of the community or the constituents. That is completely different, again, from a traditional data center that is always a net taker on the grid, because they have to be up and running at all times. They can't work in conjunction with the grid. They can't help to stabilize the grid. Again, they're always taking, whereas a Bitcoin miner is always flexing up and down based on other factors. And that's the fundamental difference between a traditional data center and a Bitcoin mine that drives millions and millions of dollars of cost differential when you're building out those sites per megawatt.
Wow, that is such a good way to clarify it. A flexible load that's sort of a give and take and help stabilize the grids. And I think there's so much FUD out there, so much misunderstanding. The energy narrative is a really powerful one, because I think, all of us, I would say, we want to make sure that the world is around 100, 1,000 years from now, and that we're taking care of it. But at the same time, we need energy. We need more energy, not less. Energy is not a bad thing. So how do you combat some of those narratives? Because I'm assuming leading a Bitcoin mining company and that being one of the big, negative stories out there, you get a lot of pushback.
Yeah, I think certainly there's a lot of just misunderstanding. I think people assume that a Bitcoin mine is a net taker. They really don't understand kind of the mechanics of the mine or how we're actually working directly in the communities in which we operate. So I think just getting that education out there is critically important. As you know, Nat, we started the Bitcoin Mining Council a couple of years ago, and kind of one of the rationales behind creating that council was to get the industry to come together with more of a consolidated voice, to share information, to show just how much of our industry is actually using renewable energy sources, which we thought was very important. And we've been able to do that kind of quarter in, quarter out. We're showing that as an industry, we're well over 50% renewably sourced, using renewably sourced energy. But I think even more exciting than that is the innovation that Bitcoin miners are putting into this space, because a Bitcoin mine, our largest operating expense is energy. So we are naturally incentivized to constantly be looking for the cheapest possible form of energy. And as a result of that, we're seeing incredible innovation happening in the space, people capturing flare gas and using that to mine Bitcoin directly at the site in oil fields that otherwise had no choice but to burn that carbon off. We're seeing people use waste methane, same thing, directly at the site using waste methane. So instead of that carbon being emitted into the atmosphere, it's being captured and used to power Bitcoin mining at site. Lots of exciting news coming out of El Salvador and for a bunch of different reasons, but including they're actually harnessing one of the volcanoes in El Salvador and using volcanic power to mine Bitcoin directly at the source. And all of these innovations are happening directly through the industry, through industry funding. We're not requiring government subsidies or grants or programs. This is just the industry naturally, in its drive for lowest cost power, is driving into really exciting new forms of innovation that are ultimately in the best interest of the environment overall.
It's time for a quick break to hear these messages from my partners. Fold is the best Bitcoin rewards debit card and shopping app in the world. You can earn Bitcoin on everything you purchase, from Amazon to groceries to your Bitcoin conference tickets. with Fold's Bitcoin cashback debit card. And you can win free Satoshis every day or even play for a whole Bitcoin by spinning the rewards wheel. You can also buy Bitcoin and stack sats directly on Fold and earn even more incentives and rewards. This is a great app to get someone totally new into Bitcoin and way better than earning airline miles or hotel points. Head to foldapp.com/Natalie, and if you use my link, you'll get up to 10,000 sats when you sign up for Spin or Spin Plus and spend at least $20 on the card. Can you share a little bit more about the economics of Bitcoin mining? Because I think I last read that Hut 8 holds 8,000 or so Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Why did the company make that decision? And does that help, especially when we're sort of in these financial conditions where there are a lot of headwinds and Bitcoin might be chopping sideways for a while?
Yeah, so we have just over 9,000 Bitcoin on balance sheet as of our last public update, and that stack's been very important to us. Again, we've had Bitcoin on balance sheet really since early 2018. Having the Bitcoin on balance sheet going into the last bear market was actually part of how we survived the bear market. We were able to pledge Bitcoin as collateral to get a fiat-based loan to cover some of the expenses and equipment requirements during that last bear market. And then when conditions improved, we were able to solve for that leverage. Fast forward to kind of where we are now. Actually, I'll take a quick step back. One of the things we saw happen in the last bull market was really exciting kind of new products and services for Bitcoin holders, so actually being able to put your Bitcoin to work. And so we were in yield programs with both Genesis and Galaxy during the bull market, where we were actually able to earn some fiat-based income off of the Bitcoin. So instead of having it just in custody, we were actually putting it to work with trusted counterparties. Obviously, we know Galaxy and Genesis quite well. But then when the market conditions turned and we didn't know where all of the exposure was in the industry, really around the time of the Luna collapse, we moved everything back into cold storage just while we let the industry kind of find its footing. And we're always looking at opportunities to kind of revisit how do we work that stack and in a more meaningful way, but of course without taking unnecessary counterparty risk, which is critically important. So for now, our Bitcoin remains in custody. But when we think about, you referenced earlier, we are in the middle of a merger. So we announced the signing of a definitive agreement earlier this year, and we're going through the process to get all of the approvals necessary to close that transaction, and hoping to have it done over the next few months. But one of the benefits for Hut, we came into the bear market with a really robust balance sheet. So we had a large Bitcoin balance, all of it unencumbered, very little leverage, and so it allowed us to be very disciplined and thoughtful about how we wanted to grow the business, because we had the options in the bear market to grow and to be strategic. And that was one of the decisions we made in the bull market, was really to put ourselves in the best possible position to take advantage of growth opportunities or distressed opportunities should the bear market come back around, which it obviously did. And so we ultimately made the decision to enter into a merger with USBTC. USBTC is a large private Bitcoin mining company in the US. So they've got sites across the US. They're headquartered out of Miami, and they took a very similar approach to Hut as far as a diversified business model. So both Hut 8 and USBTC do direct Bitcoin mining or prop mining. And then, as I mentioned, we've got a high performance computing business that pays us in fiat. And USBTC has 3 business lines that are also fiat based. So as we think about the combined company, obviously exponentially larger, we really just over double as far as employee size.
Wow.
And then combined exahash, we're sitting at 7.5 exahash will be our combined prop mining on the other side of the transaction. And then in their fiat based lines, they do hosting of other large miners, as well as managed infrastructure operations, which is a really exciting business line. It's really where they go in and they bring their software, they bring their people, and they run mining operations for other companies that want to get into Bitcoin mining, but don't have the expertise and how to actually most efficiently run and operate those mines. So that's that falls into their MIO business.
Oh, wow.
So I think just having that robust balance sheet, being really, really disciplined in the bull market has given us the opportunity to do something really, really exciting with this merger. And we are very, very excited to get to the other side of it.
So do you see North America dominating this industry? I remember when, all of a sudden China turned off Bitcoin mining and a lot of it migrated for us who live here, fortunately, over to this continent. Do you see that continuing, or do you see some maybe indications that Bitcoin mining is also expanding in other countries and there might be a little bit of a competition between different nations?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how things evolve. The United States really did become the net beneficiary of the Chinese exodus. Although we still see anywhere between 15 and 20% of mining happening in China. So
Yeah.
it's interesting that despite the ban, they still manage to have a significant amount of hash rate online. And I think one of the most unexpected trends we've seen over the last year is really the investment that Russia's been making into Bitcoin mining, and we continue to see more hash rate coming online from that region in particular. As well as the UAE. The UAE is starting, and I would expect to see it more broadly across the Middle East, coming into Bitcoin mining in a more active manner. So I think it really depends, and in part too on how the zeitgeist with regulators evolves in the U.S. We've seen mining bans in certain areas, certain jurisdictions. We have other jurisdictions that are promoting and protecting the Bitcoin mining industry. So I think we have to pay pretty close attention to how the U.S. Evolves in their treatment of mining to really understand will they continue to be able to be in the power position within this industry.
What do you wish everyone would know about Bitcoin mining, whether it's a policymaker, regulator that's making some of these decisions, or just the average person, a retail investor that's at home curious about the space? What do you wish everyone would know?
Yeah, I think people really don't need to understand what Bitcoin solves for. So I always recommend just go back to basics. For people that haven't read the Bitcoin standard, I really recommend kind of starting there so you have a really solid foundation of what is Bitcoin, why is proof of work so fundamentally important, and how is Bitcoin different from everything else. I think people really, really need to understand the fundamentals first and foremost. I think people don't understand that without Bitcoin miners and mining, there is no Bitcoin. The Bitcoin miners are responsible for the ongoing security of the Bitcoin blockchain, for the processing of all transactions, and then of course for the minting or bringing new Bitcoin into circulation. All of this is what is done by the mining community, and so we are a critically important piece. And I think sometimes people just really don't understand that, and they don't understand that proof of work is absolutely a feature of Bitcoin. It is something that we will never move away from. We can't move away from. And in fact, if you think about all of the innovation I've talked about earlier and the benefits of having a scaled, flexible load like what mining offers to grid operators, I think if we look at it from the perspective of broad kind of collaboration, we'll come to a much more exciting place for the industry. We shouldn't be at odds. There is once everybody understands the benefits and how mining actually works. I actually don't think I've ever been in a situation where once everything was fully understood by person on the other side of the table, that they didn't evolve their thinking quite significantly. It really is about education. And I think as an industry, that's the thing we need to focus on the most right now, is educating and doing it in a thoughtful way, at all levels of government, in the schools. I think, yeah, my view is education is the number one priority for us as an industry, for the next 12 to 18 months.
Completely, 100% agree. And I think sometimes because so many of us are in the weeds, we forget what it was like to just enter, and ask those very, very basic questions. So I'm actually kind of curious, because proof of work is so important, have you found a way that you like to easily explain it to someone who is just new coming in, doesn't understand, and maybe has been hearing a lot of that, the negative energy narratives out there? What is proof of work, and why is it so critical? How do you explain it?
The dominant feature in proof of work that is so critically important and differentiates it from the other digital assets out there is the decentralization. It's only through proof of work that you can have true global decentralization of the blockchain. And we've seen, we saw in the shift, Ethereum used to be proof of work and has moved proof of stake, and that very, very quickly brought a high degree of centralization and concentration to the Ethereum blockchain, which is again why it's so fundamentally important for Bitcoin to remain proof of work. It's that true link to decentralization that's the fundamental difference. And then again, if we get into the energy conversation, I bring it back to the flexible load, working with the grid, and then all of the innovation that's being driven in to benefit the environment directly by the industry.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And if people have more questions, the person, the voice in the space I always push people to, her work is Lynn Alden. She has a great, long, in-depth article about proof of work versus proof of stake, and how when you remove the energy component, you have to introduce governance, and just some of the risk factors that exist when you have a blockchain or a network that isn't truly decentralized the way that Bitcoin is because of proof of work. So okay, well, as we start to wrap up, I want to hear a little bit more just about the personal side, who Jaime is, because I know that's why a lot of people tune into this show in particular, to hear about the backstories, the origins. And you have a very fascinating career path. You worked at some very big companies, like you mentioned, IBM. I believe you worked for BlackBerry too. So can you first, you're from Canada, right? So where are you from exactly? And what was your upbringing like? Did you always know you wanted to go into tech?
So I'm actually from a small town about 2.5 hours east of Toronto. I really had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. I would just say I wanted to be a lawyer, because that's what people in my town did that had a lifestyle that I thought I wanted. But I had the benefit of growing up with computers in the house. So the first computer that we had was a VIC-20. From there, we moved to the Commodore 64. And so I grew up messing around with coding on the computers, with gaming. So I never thought about tech from a career perspective, but it was very much where I went to play. So it was, from a very early age, tech was always kind of part of the fun side of life for me. But it wasn't until I actually finished my undergrad degrees. I did a double major in psychology and political science, and then didn't know where I wanted to go from there. My work experience was limited to waitressing and bartending. So I actually went to the guidance office at the University of Ottawa, and they put me through a bunch of interest and aptitude testing that ultimately spit out a list of the top 100 careers that I was most likely to be good at and like doing, which is a critical piece.
Yeah.
And so of the top 10, seven of the jobs were within business. So I ultimately made the decision to do my MBA. And Dalhousie University, which is on the east coast of Canada, was the only MBA program at that time offering a concentration in marketing informatics, which is really the early days of big data. And so I went to that program thinking if I have to do an MBA, it would be super fun to be able to kind of play with tech at the same time. And so I chose it. I absolutely loved it. And then IBM ultimately recruited myself and one other from that program, moved me to Toronto. That was in 2000, and then my career just kind of went from there. I ultimately made the decision to leave IBM at the end of 2009 because I had had my first daughter. I now have two daughters. They're 15 and almost 13, which is scary to say. But I left IBM because I wanted to stay in Canada, but I very much wanted an executive career path. So I wanted to go to Canadian owned and operated companies where I felt like I could really have a seat at the table, and be part of decisions that were driving values straight into the community where I was and am raising my family.
It's time for another quick break to hear these messages from my partners. Next up, I want to share with you about Crowdhealth, which is a Bitcoin alternative to health insurance. Health insurance costs are sky high today, and you send your money every month to a massive corporation, and then you never see that money again, even if you don't need a doctor. But if you do need care, you end up having to pay even more out of pocket, especially if you end up as one of the 20% of claims on average that aren't covered. Crowdhealth is all about community, and the community crowdfunds everyone's healthcare. So if something happens to you and you need medical care, Crowdhealth negotiates down the medical bill lower than what insurance would be, and then the community helps you cover it. And in turn, you help cover others' needs, which has been so rewarding. I am so glad I switched to this program. And for more information, you can head to joincrowdhealth.com/Natalie and use promo code Natalie for a discount. I am so excited to share that I have joined Orange Pill app as an advisor. If you haven't downloaded this app yet, you are missing out on connecting with Bitcoiners in your area. The Orange Pill app is building the social layer for Bitcoin and helping to create opportunities for in-person connections and community building. You can create a profile and you will see lots of familiar faces there. And then you can search for Bitcoiners or Bitcoin events based on your location. I am geotagged in my home base, St. Louis, and I'm super grateful because the Orange Pill app has helped connect me with Bitcoiners in my new city. So come join us, download the Orange Pill app, and head to theorangepillapp.com for more information. All right, back to the show. Wow. Well, so how did you navigate the rest of your career path before Hut 8? And you mentioned that you've discovered Bitcoin in 2017. So I'm assuming at one of the companies, someone was talking about it, or how did you learn about Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I did a stint in capital markets. I actually worked for one of Canada's large banks within their capital markets team, really to build a transformation program for them. And so I had the opportunity to kind of look in all of the different corners of capital markets, how it was working, what was working well, what the challenges were, and that really kind of led me to look for what's the next big disruptor for financial services and capital markets, because it just seemed to me that it was so ripe for disruption. And when I left the bank, I went to Cogeco Peer which is was a data center company, to become the general manager of Canada and Asia Pacific. And during the 17-18 bull market, when I was running that data center business, we just had this massive influx in demand kind of out of nowhere, people looking for really, really large data center deployments. And that's kind of uncommon in this space. Normally the size of deployments they were talking about would have been equivalent to what we were seeing from the large hyperscale cloud providers, your AWS, your Azure, your G Suite. At that time, Netflix was doing really large deployments, but these were companies we'd never heard of coming in looking for scale of a similar size. And upon diligence of these companies, we realized they were really Bitcoin miners, many of them startups that were just looking for anywhere that they could plug in Bitcoin mining servers, and they were willing to pay kind of traditional data center pricing just to get these machines plugged in. So I think that confluence of events is really what took me all the way down the rabbit hole with respect to Bitcoin. I had the opportunity to meet some great people in the space. I read Blockchain Revolution, which is written by a great Canadian, Don Tapscott, and his son Alex. And then it just kind of kept going. Eventually I found the Bitcoin Standard, and from that moment on was really always trying to find a way to figure out how to come into this space or find a convergence narrative within tech. And anyway, long story short, that moment came when the board reached out to me in the summer of 2020 to ultimately join HUT.
Wow, that's amazing. I wanted to ask you, so you worked at BlackBerry too? What the heck
I
happened to
did.
BlackBerry?
I went to BlackBerry. It must have been 2014 to 16, something like that.
Everybody had a BlackBerry then. Everybody. It was like,
yeah, well, so I went to BlackBerry. I was obsessed with my BlackBerry. I absolutely loved the keyboard. Obviously, BlackBerry, huge Canadian tech success story until it wasn't. And so I had the opportunity to go over shortly after John Chen took over. So John Chen was brought in by the board to try to drive the turnaround of BlackBerry.
wow.
And I, through a circuitous route, had the opportunity to be asked to go over and try to help BlackBerry save the handset division. And it was just an incredible opportunity to go and watch John and John's leadership team try to tackle what was the biggest tech turnaround happening in North America. I really wanted to see kind of how they did it, how they thought about it. And so, yeah, it was very intentional, me making that move. I had been at Bell Canada. I think for just under 5 years, I was at Bell. I did 3 different business unit projects at Bell, and then went to BlackBerry. And it was truly an incredible, I would say, career-changing experience to see the inside of an organization that I had, watched my whole career from the outside, and then you kind of get in and you see where all the bodies are buried, and how that story came to be what it was, and then ultimately watching how John and the team started tackling that transformation and really turned it into what it is today, which is very much a software company.
There's a movie about the history
there is
of BlackBerry, right? Have you seen it yet?
There is. I haven't seen it yet.
Me neither.
I'm waiting to see it, but I've heard really, really good things.
I have too. Okay. I know you're short on time. Wanted to ask you though, I'm really passionate, obviously, about bringing women into the fold, because I feel like we're very underrepresented, especially when you go to these events. I don't know if you've had the same experience, but very few women as opposed to men. I think that Bitcoin is for everyone, no matter your age, no matter your background, your gender, anything. So tell me a little bit about how you've managed to balance, because like you mentioned, you've had all these executive roles, but you also have 2 daughters, you have a family, you have a really interesting relationship story. So how have you been able to juggle everything?
Look, I think it's super important to recognize that you're making trade-offs. There is no such thing as being able to quote unquote have it all. I'm very open about that. I try to mentor as many young women coming into the space as I can. And that's something I've been really passionate about since Ainsley, my eldest daughter, was born, and continue to be so. Unfortunately, my experience in traditional tech and in capital markets, and now in the digital asset space, it's not dissimilar. We really lack representation in all of these industries, and it's really, really frustrating to see that happening in the digital asset space as well. I really think a lot of it has to do with a lack of role models. If young women and girls don't see somebody that looks like them, somebody that sounds like them, somebody that they think they could see themselves becoming, it's really, really difficult. If you can't picture yourself there, you're not going to be comfortable kind of going there. And I think that's one of the big struggles that we have with lack of representation. Then we have lack of role models and lack of modeling. I think the space can be intimidating. It's very jargon heavy. I think, as I mentioned earlier, just with respect to education, that education has to go into the schools as well. And we have to make it fun. We have to make it engaging. We can't make it seem too intimidating. I speak as often as I can to high school students in various groups, especially where they're getting out strong representation of both girls and boys. But it's a challenge, and I would say in the last 20 years since I've been active in this space and doing this work, we haven't moved the needle in a significant way. It's very challenging, and I don't have the solution. I'm doing as much as I can to kind of put a spotlight on it, and you're doing a ton of great work in the space as well, Nat. I was at your brunch in Miami, which is just amazing to bring people together. Because this is a very welcoming community. If people aren't afraid to step their toe in, we'll kind of help them, has been my experience. But it's just getting them comfortable to even take the first step into the space is the hardest part.
No, I completely agree. And thank you for your kind words. I think it's important to have role models and people that you see that you can maybe be inspired by. And so hopefully we're both doing that. For women that are watching, because I'm really grateful that a lot of women do tune in and they like sort of the more personal side of the show, and they want to help educate their communities about Bitcoin. Do you have any advice? I mean, I'm assuming it's very important to have like a supportive partner, and you can work in the space and also succeed on the personal life.
Yeah, look, I think you do need to have a support network at home. My husband's great in that he has an executive career as well, but it's more traditional, and he's been super supportive of me taking a much more kind of high risk tact with my career. So that's been of great benefit. My girls, I've had big jobs that have involved a lot of travel since before they were born. So it is kind of just their version of normal, although COVID changed that, in that I was actually stuck in the house for over a year, which they were very much not used to. They like having their break from mom as well, I think. So that I work very hard with the girls not to complain about work, because first of all, I love my job. I think it's a blessing that I get to do what I do every day. Being away from them is the hardest part, the travel, but it's a really important part of how we're able to be as successful as we are. And so I try to make it exciting. Like if I'm going to a new country, I'll get the globe out and show them where I'm going. They've had the opportunity to come and see me speak a number of times. And the older they get, the more jazzed they get, I think, about mom having this kind of crazy job. And they're super proud of me. They speak about me a lot with their friends. And I think it's really been nice to see how as they've gotten older, they've gotten more just more excited about the work that I'm doing and more proud, I think. Yeah. And that's helped manage some of the difficulty, which is me not being as physically present as I would like to be. But certainly if you look at the stats, and I think stats are important, the stats show that in both daughters and sons, but in particular daughters of working mothers, ultimately tend to have more career success. They tend to be happier in their careers over the long term. And so I think I often struggle with mom guilt. I think all working moms do. But grounding yourself in some of that data, I think can really help. At the end of the day, your kids aren't going to be worse off. In many data sets, it shows that it will actually help them to thrive.
I love that. Well, I was raised by a working mom, and for me, honestly, just the idea of fixing our money through Bitcoin, I think it will allow more people to just have choice, and we should have the choice. A lot of people work because there is no choice, and they have to do things that they have to sacrifice because it's so difficult to just catch up. And when a woman can just choose, I want to work, I want to become an executive, or I want to stay home because I have the freedom to. All of it's great. I just think we need more choice, and we're not going to unless we address these fundamental financial issues in society. Jaime, it's been such a pleasure. I'm so glad we got to do this. Any final thoughts or parting words, anything else you want to share?
No, just thank you so much for having me. If your listeners, if there's anything I can do to be supportive as they kind of go on their journey, or the team at Hut, we're, widely available. We try to do as much as we can. So just please don't be shy.
Thank you so much, Jaime. Thank you so much for watching the video version of this show. I really want to hear from you. If you have suggestions or guest recommendations, you can email me at natalie@talkingbitcoin.com. Please subscribe if you want more content, and I'll see you next time.